Hello all. Thank you for coming tonight. We're so glad to be on the island so that we can hear more from the residents that are here and bring you some of our thinking and policies as well. So let's just begin. Should we go ahead?
For the record, this is the November 13th, 2019 Treasure Island Development Authority Board special meeting. Item number 1, call to order. Director Sen?
Here.
Director Dunlop?
Here.
Director Giusti?
Here.
Director Lai?
Present.
Director Richardson?
Here.
Director Kwan?
Here.
Director Schifrin?
Here.
Supervisor Haney?
Present.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item number 2, general public comment. This item is to allow members of the public to address the Treasure Island Development Authority Board on matters that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Authority Board and that do not appear on today's agenda. In addition to general public comment will be held during each item on the agenda. Members of the public shall address their remarks to commissioners as a whole and not to an individual commissioner or TIDA staff. Neither commissioners nor TIDA staff may engage in discussion of items not on the agenda. But commissioners may ask clarifying questions and gather information to place the item on a future agenda. Individual commissioners shall refrain, however, from entering into debates or discussions with speakers during public comment. Members of the public may address the board once per agenda item for up to 3 minutes. You will hear a single chime when there are 30 seconds remaining. Prior to making your comments, please state your name and the organization you are representing, if any, for the record.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board? And these are just for items which are not on the agenda yet.
How's it going? My name is Barkley Sander. I'm a Treasure Island resident, and I just wanted to ask for TIDA and SFPUC to contact Tesla to use their battery backup technology that they used in Puerto Rico to help solve the problems, because we all know that the grid is extremely antiquated and old here, kind of the similar that it is in Puerto Rico. And I know that there's work being done on the corner of the island to put a new power switch, but I think it would be in the best interest of everyone here and the work that you guys are doing to try to contact Tesla at tesla.com/utilities. Tesla has done a lot and has helped a lot of low-income communities and communities that have these power outage problems. And other communities like in San Jose and in Oakland and Jack London Square had implemented a plan to install 6,000 batteries and solar on houses to help deal with the power outages that were the cause of like PG&E. I'm also hoping that some people that are here today could kind of look into what Scott Wiener was talking about of how PG&E's current model of being like investor-owned, kind of like how TIDA owns the grid here, so it doesn't allow the SFPUC to actually upgrade it, or they can only maintain it. So kind of how the San Francisco government offered to buy all the utility equipment within the city. I think it could be in the best interest of everyone here to solve this power outage problem, but also for the residents, for the San Francisco government to put in an order to buy the equipment that's on the island so that the people that are maintaining the grid, the SFPUC, can just upgrade it and modernize it now and not make the current residents have to wait up until the redevelopment happens, because we've basically experienced over 150 power outages in the last 20 years, and there's a ton of food spoilage. There's just a ton of work that you guys are doing, but I think we really could leverage Tesla to help solve this problem. So that's essentially what I wanted to express today. I really hope that everyone here could just go to tesla.com/utilities and put in a request for seeing how Tesla could help with the power outage problem. That's essentially my comment.
Thank you very much for your suggestions. You don't work for Tesla, do you?
No,
You should.
My name's John Talbot. I live on North Point Drive, and I work for a utility company. And a sort of an ancillary part of my job is intermittently I have to place generators and be involved with the planning of the placement of generators. So I have a couple of suggestions. One, the first step in, first of all, you guys need to subscribe to some sort of generator service, and that's just a contract. If you throw money at a generator company, they will provide you with the service. And how it works is, first, they would have to come identify the need. So maybe at least medically vulnerable residents and businesses that have freezers and food spoilage or have a high public patronage every day, like the 2 stores and the restaurant. So you don't have to do the whole island, but at least do that. And then what you would have is you'd have someone come out, a subject matter expert from the generator company, and will tell you, oh, you need this amp a generator, or that amp a generator, or there's these whisper generators. If it's near a residential area, you pay a little bit more, but it's quieter. So you want to do that. And it's really a pretty simple thing to do. And what you're paying for is you're paying for them to come and place generators when you call them. And then you're also paying, and based on the length of our blackouts, we probably wouldn't need this for refueling of those generators if needed. But those are the 2 items you would want in a contract with a generator company, and that would solve a lot of the difficulties that we're having with these power outages. And having worked on former military bases, I know that the plan here is not according to industry specs, so it's actually kind of dangerous for the workers who are working on it, because a lot of communication and electrical is commingled inappropriately according to industry standards. So I understand why sometimes repairs are slow, because they're working in an environment where you can't safely rush. So thank you.
Thank you, John. All right. Okay, seeing no other people who want to.
Hello, everyone. My name's Sarah Belina. Just referencing back to what Barkley had said, he did create a website at treasureislandsfpourages.com, just for a reference.
Thank you.
As was discussed during public comment, this past week we did have a power outage affecting our power supply from Oakland. That was further complicated Saturday morning when we had some problems with one of the 2 generators that was powering the island. I know these outages, there's been an increase in these outages this year, and it's a source of frustration for many of the residents. But I did want to acknowledge the efforts of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to restore the power this weekend. And also the Department of Emergency Management, who we'll be hearing from on the regular agenda. The city did activate its incident management team structure, and there were a lot of resources brought to bear to restore power as quickly as possible. And I'd like to invite Barbara Hale, Deputy General Manager for the PUC, to come up and say a few words.
Good evening, Barbara Hale, Assistant General Manager for Power at the San Francisco PUC. Partnering with your Executive Officer, Bob Beck, and team, and the Department of Emergency Management, we did manage to get power back on. If it would be helpful, I'm happy to kind of run through circumstances and then answer any questions you may have. So just for context, as you know, TIDA owns the facilities, sets the rates, and the PUC is responsible for, like a contractor would be, for performing operations and maintenance. We first experienced an outage here on the island on Tuesday afternoon. Our teams, our electrical workers at the PUC began troubleshooting to identify what went wrong. Both islands, TI and YBI, were out. The troubleshooting, therefore, focused on the Oakland side. Just to remind you, there's a switchgear that was referred to by one of your public commenters on the island that distributes through overhead and underground facilities throughout the island the electricity. The electricity arrives at that switchgear from an underwater cable that connects to land just below the footing of the Bay Bridge. From the Bay Bridge, there's a line that proceeds underground back to a Port of Oakland substation. That's where the electricity we have delivered here is picked up. You know, upstream of that, the Port of Oakland has a line that connects to PG&E's substation. So our troubleshooting focused on the line from Land's End to the Port of Oakland. We followed protocol, identified the fact that power would be out on the island for more than 6 hours. That, per prior arrangements and agreements with TIDA, is when we activate the 2 generators, one that's on Treasure Island and one that's on Yerba Buena Island. We activated the generators on Wednesday afternoon. We encountered a fuel problem. The city fuel vendor could not commit to timely fuel deliveries to keep the generators continuously operating. We didn't see a problem with the fuel consumption rate at the Yerba Buena generator, but we did at the Treasure Island generator, so we made the determination it would be smart to conserve fuel to take that generator offline from midnight until 5 a.m. The generator then on Friday, so the islands both continued to operate until we encountered that fuel problem. We solved that fuel problem and continued to work on the source of the grid problem, the Land's End to the Port of Oakland substation line. And on Friday, we located the source of the outage on that line. Meanwhile, on Saturday, the generator failed on Treasure Island. So we had a fuel problem that interrupted service. We had a generator then, just the one on Treasure Island, that failed. We don't have grid power. We're just operating on generators, so when that generator failed, we had to problem solve for how to bring Treasure Island back up without a generator and without grid power. We, around noon, were able to restore power on Treasure Island by backfeeding from the Yerba Buena generator just to residential customers. And we switched the service then to residential customers on Treasure Island from the Yerba Buena generator. We also identified the Job Corps dorms as a critical customer that was not able to be served through that backfeeding arrangement, so we brought in additional PUC crews to put an independent generator to power the life safety systems in the dorms. So at this point, we have a situation where we have a generator that's failed, we have a grid failure as well, and we called in additional resources to help us so we could tag team both those problems. So we received additional assistance from the crews, the PUC crews that are typically stationed up at Hetch Hetchy, as well as Modesto Irrigation District electrical line workers who came and helped us restore power on the grid. So ultimately, the grid power was restored on Sunday afternoon around 1:30, 1:45. The generator that failed on Treasure Island is, work continues to be in progress to restore that capability. We don't need to use it right now because we have grid power, but we do want that generator repaired. The cause of the outage, it turns out, was a dig-in on that underground cable from the Port of Oakland substation to Land's End. This is the line that runs roughly adjacent to the approach to the Bay Bridge on the Oakland side. We have yet to have our after-incident conversations with TIDA and with the Department of Emergency Management, but we will have those after-incident conversations to identify how we can improve when we face circumstances like this again. It's a typical practice after an emergency for us to pause, take a look at the circumstances, sort of document the timeline and understand exactly what happened, and then identify where we can do a better job. Clearly, the challenges we experienced with fuel, which turns out was really not the fuel itself that was unavailable to us, it was the truck to bring the fuel to us that was unavailable to us. That's a problem that we as a city should be able to solve fairly expeditiously. So there should be some low-hanging fruit solutions. I think the lessons learned opportunities here will become clear once we've had an opportunity to sit down with the Department of Emergency Management and with your own TIDA staff to see how we can perform better. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes, yes. Mr. Haney.
Thank you. Thank you for having this item on here. I think, the first thing is just to say that I hope we all agree that it's completely unacceptable for people who live on the island, work on the island, own businesses on the island to have to continuously deal with this situation of these outages. And it's concerning to me that considering how many times that this has happened, that we haven't figured out a more immediate, sustainable way to ensure that there's backup power immediately available. And it seemed to me like there's some things here. And let me just say also, just for the residents here before I forget, that there were a lot of people who contacted my office, and you were always able to do that, as well as I'm sure TIDA and others. For folks who had damage related to the outage, you can file a claim with the city attorney's office at sfcityattorney.org/claims, or you can come and drop them through my office. I know there was a lot of concerns about what occurred and an impact on people on the island. In terms of how this works with the generators, there seems to be a number of things here that don't make a lot of sense to me. One is, why does it take so long to activate the generators to begin with once the power goes out or the grid breaks down? It sounds like it was 6 hours. That seems to me like a long amount of time to wait. Why don't we do it sooner? I'm going to ask a few questions about the generators first,
okay.
And then
okay.
Secondly, this issue of the backup fuel. Is there backup fuel available? It just seems to me that it's just incredible that in a city as wealthy as ours, in an island that continues to have this problem, that we wouldn't have backup fuel right there available, and that we couldn't get a truck to bring fuel. It just, I think understandably from people on the island feels like they're not being treated fairly and being treated as second-class citizens in their own city. The other piece of this is that once the generator ran out of fuel, it sounds like the YBI generator sort of could provide power for the Treasure Island, and actually sort of you shifted to that. Why didn't we do that earlier? And just as a general thing about the generators, the point was made about other options like battery powers and other sorts of things. If our backup power is so unreliable, it seems like we have first and foremost to make sure that obviously we fix the grid, but in the meantime that we have a reliable source of backup power that's there with the adequate amount of fuel. And maybe we need 2 generators on Treasure Island. It just seems hard to believe that our backup source could also go down in light of how many times this has happened.
Ready?
I got a few more, but that's about the generators.
Okay, I'll try to take each of these in turn. So why 6 hours for the generators? That's certainly something that TIDA and the PUC can revisit. We do have the standard practice takes us about an hour to get the generators up and running, and then about an hour to switch back to grid power after the grid is restored. So an outage that's going to last something more than a couple of hours is eligible for, eligible for us to switch to the generators. It definitely takes additional crew for us to both troubleshoot the problem and set the generators up. So those are just complexities that, when we addressed this question last, PUC and TIDA resolved that a 6-hour window was the appropriate window for, if we anticipated an outage would be longer than 6 hours, we would start the generators. That doesn't mean we're waiting 6 hours to begin the process. That just means that once we figure out the situation is bad enough that we don't think we'll be able to restore power within 6 hours, we start them up. So we could start them in less time. It's just we need time to make that judgment call. With respect to backup fuel, the city does have a fuel truck. The fire department has a fuel truck that we would normally be able to call upon. It was not available. The vendors themselves who are responsible for providing us with this service could not commit. So it's sort of like a domino of a series of unfortunate circumstances that led to us not having, we had the generator, we didn't have, and we had a fuel plan with the vendor, but the vendor says no. Well, so sort of plan B is to go to using one of our own trucks within the city fleet that the fire department has. That one's also unavailable. So I guess we had to have a plan C, and we didn't. So the possible solutions there are for us to procure an additional fuel truck. And so that's one of the considerations that we'll be discussing as we talk about after incident, cures, what could we do differently, what could we do better. Your next question was about the backfeeding from YBI and why we didn't perform that earlier. So there was a window of time there where we spent time from an engineering perspective looking at what could be done. We were trying to we needed to establish whether YBI generator could carry the load of Treasure Island as well as Yerba Buena Island. We established it could not. Then we looked at whether we could restore portions of the island, and that is the step we took. We restored we prioritized residential customer restoration, and those were the areas of the island that were restored. So that was really just a series of, sort of working through the problem. With respect to backup battery power, we have looked at that concept before. I think it was referred to as the Puerto Rico idea. We had performed some work. Our engineering staff had performed some work on that possibility before and evaluated it. Most of the problems on Treasure Island are distribution system problems, not supply problems. Backup generation of a battery pack style would not solve for that. And it would be a supplemental power source that would take quite a bit of space and expense. That's certainly something that can be revisited, as I say, as we learn from these incidents. We question again, what are the appropriate steps for us to take? We can revisit that, but in our last look at that option, it was deemed to be insufficient to solve for the kinds of circumstances we typically experience on Treasure Island. Most of the outages on Treasure Island are distribution system outages on the system here on Treasure Island or on the system on Yerba Buena Island. No amount of battery backup could solve for a dig-in kind of problem like we experienced this time. And that was frankly on new equipment. So couldn't have anticipated or protected against that. The systems that are designed to protect against that are requiring people who dig to to notify us, to have a USA come out and mark the locations. If they have a dig-in, notwithstanding that, they're supposed to report that. We received no such reports. So, sort of the fail-safes did not operate as they are supposed to on the dig-in situation that we experienced this time.
Thank you. So it does sound like there are some changes that we might be able to make, either on making sure that the generator is activated sooner, and that there's another backup source of fuel that's more likely to be available. I think those things would be very important to do in the future as you assess what didn't work here. The transmission cable issue was identified on Tuesday, and when were the crews dispatched to make the repairs?
The repairs so the first step we needed to do was make sure we had the proper equipment and supplies to perform the repairs. We obtained the appropriate cable and connectors and everything on Friday afternoon. Repairs on the cable started on Saturday.
And there was mutual aid that was requested?
Yes, and we requested mutual aid so that we could do more than one task at a time, right? So that we could look to repair the generator as well as repair the grid power, so that we so that we could accelerate the pace at which the grid power improvements would be completed.
And so there was mutual aid requested and an emergency declaration Friday and Saturday?
Mr. Beck can respond to the emergency declaration aspects. That was performed by TIDA.
If for the mutual aid or the emergency declaration, would that have allowed us to do something that we weren't able to do earlier on? Or why did it take so long to make those two declarations, or mutual aid and emergency declaration? If we would have done that earlier, would we be able to have dealt with some of these barriers earlier, or get assistance quicker?
So we started to reach out for assistance not through the mutual aid approach, so those wheels started turning before the declaration was made and the formal mutual aid request went out. So we had already arranged with we had already been talking with Modesto Irrigation District to come to our assistance, and we'd already arranged for the supplies through informal mutual assistance before formally requesting it on Saturday. But I can't speak to Bob, if you could.
As far as the emergency declaration goes, in consultation with the Department of Emergency Management and others, we made that declaration on Saturday morning to expand the contractual options that are available to both TIDA and the PUC. As it turns out, all of the contracting measures that were used to respond to this were already at our disposal, but it was thought, as we were continuing to explore a number of alternate paths on Saturday morning, that it was expedient to declare the emergency, so that if we needed to exercise other alternatives, we could.
Last question I want to ask, because I'm sure other people have questions. Thanks for your patience with me. What is the plan between now and the new power grid to protect residents and businesses from power outages? In particular, I know you have a lot of experience with this. Are there components that could be installed now before a total grid makeover that would help residents and businesses immediately?
So we can certainly look again at, and again, this is part of what we'll talk about in the after incident setting, and with the PUC and TIDA staff together, as we have in the past, look at what additional investments could be made that are prudent to minimize outages between now and when island improvements are completed. Certainly the new switchgear that will be installed that picks up the cable from underwater and transitions to the distribution network here, that new switchgear will be an improvement that is scheduled today to be online in December of 2020. So that, that's the calendar and the target date for that improvement. Whether there are additional things we can do to the existing systems in advance of wholesale improvement of those systems, we'll take another look at that. We did have a round of improvements that we made after the last spate of outages, and we can have another one of those sort of brainstorming roundtable conversations with the engineers, looking again at the development schedule and seeing where there might be appropriate near-term improvements that can be made.
Can we install the switchgear sooner than by December 2020?
I'll take that answer. We need to geotechnically improve the site where the switchgear is going to be located, and that work has begun. So we've already begun what is 15 months worth of construction to install the new switchgear. I also wanted to add, just in terms of contingency plans, following the outage that we had on President's Day weekend, which was an extended outage of about 13 hours, we do have a contingency plan for connecting an emergency generator to this facility as a location if there was, as Mrs. Hale mentioned, the more typical outage is a failure of the distribution network on the island where our main generators cannot bring the island back up. But to be able to bring a portable generator to power up this facility, so at least there would be a center on the island where people could come and charge phones or other devices in the event of an extended failure of the distribution system on the island.
So last thing, which is that 15 months of construction sounds like a long time for me. I don't know if there's a way to expedite the switch gear. That seems like a long time. And then also on the charging stations, just if there's maybe some sort of standardized policy around that of sort of after how long we're able to put the charging stations into place and where they are, et cetera. It sounds like after 10 plus hours of the outage that there wasn't a charging station yet put up. So I think the charging station is very important, but that was some feedback I also received.
We actually did activate that for Saturday morning here, but by early Saturday afternoon, the residential neighborhood was back up online, and so we demobilized that from here, and we took it over to the Job Corps Center so that the kids there could charge their facilities.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Haney. Mr. Dunlop.
Thank you very much. And, I appreciate your time and obvious consideration that's gone into this. I am a resident here, and I can tell you it was extremely frustrating, and the on and off aspect of it. And initially, in my calls to 311, or actually, when I call 311, I get Oakland still. And I don't know, they can't really help me over there. But the people that I did get in San Francisco, there seemed to be a bit of confusion. And, you know, I just really felt that myself and my neighbors needed a little better direction, if possible, and especially about the timing, because it seemed like there were many different times that, oh, it's going to be ready at this time, or it's just going to be out for an hour, and then it went out longer. There's, you know, just numerous on and offs, and it was just, boy, it was rough. And you know, for me, it was rough. Imagine somebody with small children and all of those things. So I've lived here for 10 years. This is, at least from my experience, the worst that we have had. And it was just, you know, all the neighbors were frustrated, angry. And although I know that there were constant notices put out, some of them didn't seem as accurate. So I think as in the future, you might look at maybe trying to notify quickly, and then the next notification having real-time information, and like, this is going to be out so long. So it's just not kind of a guessing game. And so we can feel a little more confident within the system. And, you know, this it clearly just isn't working. I'm not an expert on this, and I don't know exactly when the new power grid's going to be on at some beautiful day in the future. But in the meantime, just, you know, I know the staff is concerned. I mean, they work on the island, practically live on the island sometimes. And obviously I know the board is very concerned, and certainly by the amount of people that are here. I mean, we've just got to do something, and something, as the supervisor mentioned, something permanent and something sustainable. This is not working. This is, if any other part of the city had this issue, I'm sure it would be fixed a lot sooner. We're in a unique situation, and so I think we just need some unique ideas, like bringing up the Tesla idea, though I guess you've looked at it and might not be appropriate, but there really has to be something so we can, you know, live our lives like regular San Franciscans. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunlop. Ms. Richardson.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And we know that your agency, including you, actually, folks were working around the clock to try to fix this, is, yes, one of the worst outages we've ever had. But I think we need to kind of go back here to see the fundamental issues. Treasure Island is not fully an integrated part of San Francisco. We inherited this. You mentioned the distribution infrastructure that caused this. The source was in Oakland, at the Port of Oakland. Someone was digging there. My first question, what would the response today? Has anyone at the Port of, do we have any kind of service level, MOU or agreement? When this thing happened, someone digging there, it is something that, because the burden, it's on the Oakland side. That's my first statement. What happened is that you look, over the years, we've had almost 150, as one of the residents mentioned before. So we sort of have some patterns here, little here and little there and little there. And we know that in the development of Treasure Island, that addressing this is there, but we're not there yet. And so we have a man-made outage that happened. It could also happen. There's an earthquake or somewhere, and you're dealing with all this underground, cable that they are going to be obsolete anyway because we're looking at the, other types of distribution systems. You have this switch. So my question, we know in third world countries, power outages are a common occurrence. So here, portable generators, there are all kinds of in the market. And again, I'm looking here, we have seniors, we have young people or whatever, and it might be the time now to be even looking, because even in the San Francisco mainland, as we know, the North Bay and all of them, when they have all these power outages and fires or whatever, and the energy were cut off. So at some point, what we've experienced here is going to happen somewhere, even in the mainland San Francisco. Isn't it time then now to make us a pilot, whereby when this thing happened, someone mentioned having a central generator. What happened is that to charge your phone, you're still not going to be able to charge your, your refrigerator and all of that, your food. So can we now maybe look a little bit differently to, because this area is not really a part of San Francisco yet, and our energy needs are going to be different even when we build it out, to have a backup system that people can activate themselves for a few hours or whatever. I think it's going to cost less when you look at the kind of catastrophe here, and now people talking about lawsuit and all this other. It's just something to look at. That maybe we can have people here self-assured that they can have something until we can figure out what is going on. And again, should someone is digging in Oakland, they're going to continue digging, even in San Francisco, or the underground cable falls again. It will happen. It's an old technology and system is going to happen. So then we can have our own guaranteed backup system. So again, thank you again for your leadership there, because we know that, yes, everything looked kind of bad, but your agency was right and trying to do something, but we do need a solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Richardson. Ms. Sly?
Thank you. Just quick few terminology clarifications. What is USA?
Utility Service Alert. This is a system where anyone who's going to dig knows they are supposed to call into this system to have a notification then go out to owners of infrastructure that's underground. And all of those owners of infrastructure underground have to come out and mark where their infrastructure is. So this is the standard protocol where wherever you dig, okay. This is the standard protocol.
And when you say that the cable, the grid problem was a dig-in problem, do you mean that there was damage to the cable done during some sort of digging activity?
Correct.
Okay. And is that done by the Port of Oakland or PGE?
So we are looking into who requested the USA markings, so we can go back to them and find out who actually was on site and performed the digging.
Okay.
And so that's part of our investigation that's underway now.
Okay.
I don't have answers for you, but we are looking into that.
Great. And then second part of my question is, can you talk a little bit more about the distribution versus the supply question? Because, I'm a layperson, and when I hear this, the way I understood it was that you're basically saying the Treasure Island's energy issue or utility issue is a distribution problem, meaning there's energy somewhere that's being pumped into the system, but it just cannot get to all the residents that need it.
You completely understand it. That's
okay.
Exactly what I'm saying.
But then you also said that using backup energy sources like battery packs there's not going to be enough batteries to help the distribution problem. So here's where the disconnect happens for me. I mean, wouldn't it make sense that if you located the backup sources, whether it's battery pack or, as Linda said, some sort of portable system closer to all the receivers, the residents, then wouldn't you solve your distribution problem?
So you could, if you had that backup supply at each residential unit or at each customer account. That's the only way that you would fail-safe say, we know the power won't go out, is that if the grid power went out and everyone had an individual generator at their location, and those generators were connected in a way that automatically transferred from grid to customer generator, if that was an automatic process, you would have a more seamless system. The Puerto Rico example is not that. And what I'm hearing in terms of some of the questions, both from yourself and from Ms. Richardson, is there something between the big generators, the two big generators we have today, and more distributed generators, be they renewable sourced or fossil fuel sourced, distributed around the island? Could that be a solution? And we can certainly, together with TIDA, we can certainly look at that. I don't have a good sense as I stand here today what the cost to the to TIDA would be of that, but that would come at some cost, and we can put that on the list of things to discuss as we look at in the after incident situation what we can do.
Great. So thank you for that response. That really clears things up for me. It sounds like there are potentially technical solutions. We just have to evaluate whether or not they're worthwhile to do. And it sounds like there will be some sort of a postmortem discussion around what happened, and that's very much appreciated, and there's a lot of learning to do there. I also just want to say that it sounds like TIDA and PUC has tried to do the right thing in the past when this has happened before by evaluating the situation and also coming up with a backup plan. And unfortunately, in this case, it seems like there are multiple failures in the chain of command, I guess, in the backup plan. I would just encourage you to, in this next phase of evaluation, to consider whether or not the distribution of resources is allocated in the correct way, because it sounds like there's one generator on Treasure Island and one on YBI, but the occupancy is clearly much more heavier on TI side. So, maybe just think about that. To your earlier point about thinking about more interim sources that would provide basically a distributed source instead of a central source and then trying to distribute it sounds like a good thing to explore. Obviously, it sounds like it could be very costly, and that's something that the city and TIDA will have to consider. And then that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lai. Mr. Kwan, did you have a comment?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. AGM Hale, hello.
Hello.
First, kudos for bringing in Hetch and Modesto Irrigation. You're reaching out far to get them to help, so really kudos for bringing about that solution. I also want to affirm your general approach. The infrastructure is so fragile here that I know that the PUC, there are a lot of newer technologies out there that could be experimented upon, but I want to recognize the PUC's wisdom in not going in that route, because those experiments could lead to more catastrophic failures. So stay on that track. At Cal Academy, we're familiar with the difficulties that can occur to get diesel for your backup generators. We have 40,000 live animals to keep alive when the power goes out. And I just want to affirm too, you're looking for sourcing an additional fuel truck. That two are not available is a catastrophe. It is Murphy's Law, but that third option makes a lot of sense. But the previous director's question about who did the dig-in, I have a question, maybe this might be more appropriate for Bob or AGM Hale. What disincentives are there for people who don't comply with regulations in filing a request to dig? Is there a fine involved? Silly mistakes like someone who does that kind of digging, and I don't know the full story, so I shouldn't say silly, but that has obviously a broad impact. And I just want to leave it out there as an action item to hear more about what the repercussions are for someone who causes this type of incident.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Schifrin?
I was just going to actually say the same thing. It sounds like you guys are still doing the investigation, but it sounds like the failure to comply, and since they didn't do the USA, it'll be interesting to see how you find out, who was doing the digging. But
just to clarify on that point, we did get a USA request. We did mark the sites. That much
so
we're
you
sure
guys
of.
did the marking, but then whoever did the digging didn't follow?
That's the part that we're still investigating. Is did the permittee, the person who got the permit and the USA work done, is that the entity? Did they come out? I don't know that. Did they have a subcontractor come out? I don't know that. There were multiple locations that were dug in, so we need to investigate all the circumstances around that.
Got it.
But we do know that a contractor asked for USA markings, and those markings occurred.
Okay. And so then just so I understand kind of different scenarios, if there was some failure on their part to comply and they did make an error, are they financially liable in any way, and could we use that money for solutions here on the island?
Yes, and we're working with the city attorney on that very question.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? very quick.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask real quickly just about people who have had losses, and I know the supervisor mentioned that, but then the restaurants and all the other businesses that operate on the island. Is there a fast, easy process for both residents and the businesses?
Yeah, so I would just echo what the supervisor said, what Supervisor Haney talked about. The contacting the city attorney's office is the appropriate step. And I don't know how long the process takes, I have to admit, but we can look into that and report back on it.
Okay, last comment from the board, Mr. Haney.
Sorry, just realized there was a few other small things. In the residential power up, was Life Learning Academy included in that?
I don't know.
Okay, that's one thing too.
We checked with the Life Learning Academy, and although they now have a dormitory facility, all of their students were home for the weekend.
Oh, okay.
So they did not have any students on the island, so we did not prioritize that at the same level as Job Corps and some other restorations.
Thank you for checking on that. I also had some folks let me know that they thought they saw that there were that the power outages have an impact on the sewer system, or at least there was a perception of that. Are those two things connected at all?
The wastewater treatment plant has its own generator. Power supply was interrupted to some of the sewage pump stations. In that event, the PUC has what is called a Vector truck located here on the island, and they're able to go individually to those pump stations and collect the sewage as it builds up within the wet well of the pump station. When the residential neighborhood came back online, power was also restored to all of the pump stations within the residential neighborhood. So there were no sanitary sewer overflows or other problems related with the outages this past week.
Great, thank you.
Okay, all right. So thank you, Ms. Hale. And Mr. Beck, we will want to have another report when we have all of the information and you've had your post-mortem examination. We will want to certainly hear all of the answers. Thank you.
Happy to come back.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Beck, to continue with your report, and I would urge us to speed it up a little.
Yeah, no, I have just a very few items and no more speakers. Last Tuesday, or I'm sorry, the Tuesday before last, on October 29th, Treasure Island Advisors, TIDA, and TICD staff held a workshop, Pathway to Homeownership workshop at the Shape, attracting 81 attendees. On October 30th, the cleanup site 24, which includes the former dry cleaning facility, was transferred from the Navy to TIDA. At this point, 70% of the base has been transferred to the city. And on the 23rd and 24th of this month, the Treasure Fest, formerly the Treasure Island Flea, will be holding its last event on the island. The Treasure Fest will not continue in 2020 due to scheduling conflicts with utility work that is needed along the western shoreline, but may return in 2021. Also, for all of the residents on the island, wanted to remind everybody that next year we will be having 3 of these on-island board meetings, beginning in March, July, and then November of next year. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there any public comment on the director's report? Any other board questions? If you have one, please come up and state your name.
Jim Morowski, a business owner, 12 years here on the island. Quick question for Ms. Hayes from the PUC. What was the basis of the decision to energize YBI when there's only a couple construction sites on the island for the developer? That's one. Why was that done initially? And the second thing is that my understanding is that the TI generator, backup generator, is relatively new. It's actually very young. And so I'd like to know from a report from the PUC, why did it fail on Saturday? And then finally, just as a comment from on behalf of a lot of business owners here. We're facing the power outages, construction, delays, people getting diverted, customers getting, basically thinking it's a zombie apocalypse out here sometimes. And at the same time, TIDA is raising the commercial rates. And that's a comment and a question that I have for you that I'll take up later on, but that's a comment for all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Yeah, I just have a couple of quick points of fact. Like I said, I work for a utility company. I've been involved in many dig-ups and repairs of utility lines. And typically, about 80% of the time, the fault is of the contractor who did not call in. When a contractor calls in for a marking of the utility lines, it's rather rare for them to actually hit something. It's more common over a large extended area like this work apparently was. And it is, what can happen is actually there can be an error in the person who makes the markings, because typically a utility worker will know their area and they'll know where the stuff is even without doing certain types of locating things, tricks of the trade. But if it's something like the path of a former military, I don't know who's owned this in the past, and it's outside the city limits, the chance of a mistake are much, much higher, and the PUC should not be investigating whether the PUC was the cause of this dig-up, because that is the distinct possibility based on my experience and the description of the problem. The other thing, it was not correct when the person said that because the problems with the distribution facility, which is like the final mile out to the residences, that we can't have the Tesla solution. That's not true. The Tesla solution actually is designed for that, because this would go on an individual building, either an apartment building or a business, and there's built-in mechanism where you don't have to wait 6 hours. It instantly switches over with a zero loss of service as soon as the AC power fails. And as far as the generator needing however many hours lead-up time, that is ridiculous. That's not standard industry practice. We've had technology for decades that lets you switch virtually instantly. So they either need a new generator vendor. Well, they definitely do based on the fuel shenanigans. And my final thing is, if they don't want to do the Tesla thing, they can at least subscribe to, like I said earlier, a spot generator service where they're teed up to bring generators to buildings and businesses as needed in a timely manner. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next. Yes.
Hi there. My name is Linda. I'm the owner of Araceli Cafe. We were out of power for 38 hours, and I just want to know if you foresee this happening often. We're losing, people are canceling parties in the future because of this outage.
Yes.
So that's my first question. Second question is there any way to get services like dry ice or, obviously the generators, but battery powered lights? We could not get any information through 311. They just kept telling us, sorry, it's residents only. So
yeah,
that's my question.
Oh, well, thank you.
Do you
very frustrating.
Do you foresee this happening in the next year?
Yeah. We are not, cannot answer questions, but we have noted your comments, and Mr. Beck will take that into consideration. Thank you so much.
And I just wanted to make another comment on the cost. I actually made a website, the Treasure Island SF Power Outages, and that made the San Francisco PUC do a white paper of how the Tesla solution can work. Because initially I had asked property management if I personally can pay to come up with a solution, because I am privileged enough to have the money and the resources to do so. I got a quote from the electrician that provides essentially the repairs for the island, and I got a quote of $30,000 from me personally to pay to prep my apartment to install a Tesla Powerwall. I have a quote. I just got it this last week because there was a lot of pressure on it from all the power outages, and it just goes to show that we can install Tesla Powerwalls, power packs, or mega packs. An example is Tesla in Australia installed the largest battery in the world to help solve their problem. So there is no scalability issue with the Tesla solution at all. And if we let Elon and their team know, I bet just like they did in Puerto Rico and just like they did for the divers when they were stuck in the caves, that he would be like, this is a perfect marketing opportunity for them. They're going to solve a 20-year issue. It's something that can be solved. It's just, does TIDA want to spend the money to solve it? Or does the government want to solve it? Because honestly, it feels, by the most recent census data, that 40% of all residents that live here make under $30,000 a year. And I'm not talking as Facebook, but I'm a Facebook employee. And I couldn't imagine if I lived in, like, to say, a tower downtown and the power went out consecutively like this, that these high privileged tech people like myself would have to deal with that. You guys wouldn't in an instant go to some tech bros and stuff like that are making $200,000 a year and say, hey, we're not going to spend the money to solve this problem by simply contacting Tesla at tesla.com/utilities to start that conversation. Because if you're not going to at least have that conversation and create a price around the solution, then I don't think we're doing enough for the residents.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So, seeing no other public comments, can we go to the next item?